should also have some time for questions after the presentation. If you would like any clarification on publication ethics, which I already clarified is a really important topic. So if you have any questions at the end, please don't be shy, even though we don't have too many mugs left. So what I'll go over today is what publication ethics are and what the trends we're seeing within publication ethics are, and some examples of publication issues and how to avoid them. We'll also dive into AI in publication ethics, as we know that's a hot topic, although of course you already got some spoilers for this session already, so you might already know more than you think. And I'll talk about if something does go wrong, how we investigate and resolve those publication ethics issues. So I already mentioned the word publication ethics a lot. So what are publication ethics? So publication ethics refers to a range of ethical standards, policies, and guidelines that are aimed at ensuring the integrity, quality, and validity of published research in science. So these standards apply to all aspects of the manuscript and the process of publishing as well. So for example, this includes the authorship contributions, image and data validity, as well as anything to do with research ethics, participant protection as well, so issues like informed consent, and intellectual property. So why are we talking so in-depth about publication ethics today? So essentially, there's a growing trend of retractions over time, and this has meant that the general public is starting to be a little bit more skeptical about scientific research. So it's important that we hold ourselves to the highest ethical standards possible when it comes to research and the publishing process, to make sure that people know our results can be trusted. So we hold ourselves accountable as publishers all throughout the publishing process, and that includes detailed checks during the submission stage, so checks for compliance with our policies, for example, and which we always ensure are transparently displayed on our website. So if you're ever unsure about what the requirements are, you can always find them on our instructions for authors. We also, throughout this process, are supervised by experts in the field. So for example, our editorial board members and section editors-in-chief and editors-in-chief as well. And then if anything does go wrong post-publication, we do have mechanisms to make sure that we correct any issues that have cropped up. So what kinds of publication ethics might we be looking for during our checks? So the things we're looking for are quite wide-ranging, and it can be things related to the research integrity. So that's things related to specifically how the study itself was conducted, or things related to publication ethics. So that might be things like the plagiarism, copyright infringement, or improper authorship, data fabrication, and image manipulation, because those are all around the actual publishing aspect itself. So I'll start with research integrity, and as an issue at this step is likely to mean that your paper could never be published. So it's very important to get the research integrity things correct from before you even started collecting data. So the topic most relevant to all of you here is research ethics in humans. So research using human participants needs to comply with a number of vital criteria and meet appropriate reporting standards so that readers can be sure that those criteria have been met. So that includes complying with the Declaration of Helsinki, and clearly stating that as well, and obtaining appropriate international review board approval or another relevant ethics committee as well. And very relevant to nursing reports, if you have things like clinical trials, these need to be registered before patient enrollment, which is very important for us. And as well as that, it is important to fill out a consort 2010 checklist as well for clinical trials. So those are relatively new requirements, so do make sure that you're familiar with all of these requirements before you begin any data collection. So I won't go over the next few slides about animal, cell, and plant research in very much detail because they're not highly relevant to you as nursing students and early career researchers. But if you have any personal interest, do feel free to ask me at the end. But the main takeaways is that animal research does have a lot of essential criteria similar to what human research does. It requires international review board approval and needs to meet some of these reporting principles and general guidelines as well. So cell research is to an extent considered research on humans when those cells are of human origin, so they require very similar ethical approval to research in human participants themselves. So they require appropriate informed consent and an international review board statement for research in cells. For research in plants, for transparency reasons, as much information as possible should be provided about the specimens. And generally speaking, transparency is really a key issue in many aspects of publication ethics. So, for example, duplicate submissions and plagiarism are two issues that are related to transparency. So duplicate submissions are when authors simultaneously submit the same manuscript to two different journals. So why is that considered an ethical violation? So essentially, it uses up resources from the journal, from the editors, from peer reviewers, unnecessarily. And authors, we also are required to outline in their cover letter that they have not done a duplicate submission. We do also have methods, and other publishers have these methods as well. We work together on this to check for duplicate submissions. So this is something to avoid. Not a lot of early career researchers realize this is a rule, so make sure you're familiar with this. So another important issue is text duplication or plagiarism, which we've already mentioned. So plagiarism is quite a big problem, and text duplication is checked for in every single submission that we received. So like Ploy mentioned when answering the question earlier, it's important to, as far as possible, put things into your own words and make sure you appropriately cite any ideas, methods, or things like that that you've used within your manuscript. One aspect that gets a little bit confused with plagiarism is copyright issues. So copyright might be a problem, or permissions might be required if figures or tables have been reused in previous works. So like plagiarism, copyright issues can be done entirely by accident. So it's really important to look out for. So copyright permissions should be received prior to submission because they can take time to obtain. So images that might need copyright permissions are things like images or figures previously published, or concrete images, which is a fancy way of saying a real-life picture of something. So it's important to ask yourself, when working out if you think something needs a license, has it been previously published? And if yes, was it published under a CC BY license? So the CC BY license is really important, and it's what we at MDPI publish under, and what the vast majority of open access publish under as well. And this means that content can be reused, provided that it's appropriately cited. If, however, the content you want to reuse is from a closed journal, so a not open access journal, it's very, very rarely that you'll be able to reuse that content without permission. And it's important to note that isn't permission from the authors, that's permission from the publishers. Because that's something that authors get confused about a lot of the time. It's important to note that unless you're publishing under an open access CC BY license, you no longer own the copyrights to your work. It's owned by the publisher. So that's another benefit that we find of publishing open access as well. So again, if you are considering whether you can republish a figure, consider if it's been previously published, and if yes, what license it was published under. If it's a concrete image, did you take the photo? If you took the photo, you have the copyright of it. If one of your co-authors took the photo, that's fine as well. But if it's just a photo you've taken of the internet, of something generic, like of a mouse, of a nurse, of a chair, something like that, those things, no matter how simple, might technically require copyright. So, AI is new, and of course it's very new to the publishing industry as well. And to be honest, the answers to many questions that people have about AI are still kind of being worked out. So questions regarding what is and isn't an appropriate use of AI in the preparations of manuscripts are still being worked out, and they're still ever evolving as AI changes and develops. So let's explore the AI topic together. So, like I mentioned, this is changing, but we will pretty consistently follow the guidelines laid out by COPE, and AI is no exception. And I, of course, recommend that you also follow COPE's guidelines in this regard. So according to current COPE regulations, authors are permitted to use AI within their manuscripts if they are transparent about how and where it has been used, so that readers have clarity and the academic community has clarity on how the manuscript has been created. So MDPI's policy in turn is that where Gen AI has been used for purposes like generating content, study design, data collection, analysis, or interpretation of data, authors are required to declare this during the submission process and cite any non-publicly available data in accordance with journal guidelines. So there is an important omission there that you might have spotted, and that is for text editing. So if we follow this flowchart, how was AI used within the manuscript? In the case of language editing, spell check, grammar polishing, then no specific declaration is required. So, however, if we follow the flowchart again, and AI was used for content generation or data analysis or anything like that where AI is generating its own content, then the AI use needs to be declared during submission, so that's within the cover letter, as well as within the method section and in the acknowledgements as well. So what would that declaration look like? So here's an example of our website, and you can just use this directly with the blanks filled out as needed. So during the preparation of this manuscript, the authors used tool name, so let's say ChatGPT, the version information, so 4.0, for the purposes of, let's say, debugging R code lines 200 through to 234. The authors have reviewed and edited the output and take full responsibility for the content of this publication. So you've used AI and you've declared it appropriately, but now is AI an author of your paper? So MDPI follows the ICMJE, which is the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors guidelines on who is and isn't an author. So these guidelines state that substantial contributions to the concept or design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of the data for the work, drafting the work or reviewing it critically for important intellectual content, final approval of the version to be published, and agreement to be accountable for all aspects of the work. So can I just have a quick show of hands Do you think ChatGPT or another AI should be an author on your paper if you've used it for something like data analysis? So hands up for yes, I think it should be an author. And hands up for no, I don't think it should be an author. I mean, one person is confident it shouldn't be an author. Don't be shy. Not sure? Okay.
Not sure.
So, thankfully, AI does not meet the criteria for authorship. It cannot meet that last criteria, which is taking responsibility for the content of the research. So authors need to be willing to take responsibility for all of the content in their manuscripts, whether it's AI generated or not. But what risks might authors face when using AI content? So the risks associated with AI-generated content, this is a non-exhaustive list, but these are some of the common ones. So issues like data fabrication, plagiarism, image manipulation, are all potential issues that could crop up. So let's explore how AI can create these risks in these areas of publication ethics, and whether the author intended them to or not. So AI and copyright infringement. So if copyright materials are used to train a generative AI model, the generated content may break copyright laws. And this is very much a gray zone right now. There are a lot of lawsuits pending. So for example, this is one from Disney and Universal suing Midjourney, which is the image generation version of ChatGPT, for use of their copyrighted content in training. So there are still pending lawsuits in this area, and it is developing. However, let's say even if the content was published under that CC BY license we talked about earlier, where you are allowed to use and reproduce the content that it creates, correct attribution to the original source still needs to be clearly stated, and if AI made your image, you might not be able to give that proper attribution. So this is a very similar issue to how AI can create plagiarism problems. So AI might use ideas or text directly from other existing manuscripts without proper attribution and without your knowledge as well. So this creates a plagiarism issue that either results in text duplication or essentially idea theft that you may not have even realized was happening if you're using AI. So in addition to occasionally failing to attribute the source of content, current AI tools do have issues of hallucinating or essentially making things up. So hallucinating or data fabrication or reference fabrication can be an issue when it comes to things like facts. So AI can just make up facts or references as well. So you really need to make sure that what the AI has produced for you is correct by your expert opinion, and that you can take responsibility for everything in your paper. So another thing that one might be tempted to use AI for, but should be entirely avoided, certainly currently, while AI is a little bit of a black box, even if you're asking it to do something simple with an image, we don't entirely know what it is doing. So this could lead to problematic figures, for example, where they're distorted in a way that makes the information easy to misinterpret or makes it unclear. So that could be, for example, the introduction of elements into the figure, moving or removing features of the figure, or grouping things that shouldn't be grouped, or changing contrast and brightness as well. So do certainly in the current iteration of ChatGPT and similar AI as tools, avoid using it for image reasons. So let's say a paper does get published and it has some kind of ethical issue. Then what happens? So the process for investigating and resolving publication ethics issues that I'm going to outline is MDPIs, but all reputable publishers will follow a very, very similar framework as well, so it should be relatively transferable. So in terms of how the investigation process starts, so typically a complaint is raised by potentially a reader that spotted an issue, or where we spot something during an internal audit, or on a public forum like PubPeer or something like that, that's then in turn picked up by our internal editors. And important to note, no matter what issue it is, no matter what ethical issue it is, the same process is followed for investigation. So the journal investigates, we request a comment from the author, the editorial and ethics teams review and examine, and then we require an EBM or an SCIC or an EIC to evaluate and decide the case, because typically it requires an expert opinion within the field as to whether what the authors or the complainant has said is valid or not. And then we want to inform all parties affected for transparency, and then the journal will process further as needed. So what are the possible outcomes to an investigation of ethics issues? So it's important to note that a complaint doesn't necessarily mean that something is wrong. That's why an investigation needs to be completed and carried out. So, for example, in the first case, potentially the authors have provided a good reason as to why the issue is what it is, and maybe it was a mistake, maybe it's actually not a problem at all, but the authors have been very transparent and clear and explained themselves well to the satisfaction of the editorial office and any EBMs or academic editors brought in to examine the process. Next, there might be a correction to the scientific record. So this might happen if, for example, if with an adjustment, the manuscript itself could still contribute to the scientific record. So maybe it was a relatively minor issue that just needs to be updated. Then in that case, a correction might be issued. Retraction, it's important to note that when a paper is retracted, this could be for reasons such as a major issue that means if that was adjusted, the paper couldn't contribute to the scientific record anymore. So it's really important to note that retractions, yes, do happen because of author misconduct, but they also happen because of simple mistakes. So seeing someone with a retraction on their record is not a sign of wrongdoing in of itself. So that's very important to note as well, that they are not a punishment. Expressions of concern might be issued on manuscripts if they've got very complex or intense investigations that are taking a long time. And we issue those because we want readers of the paper to know that the paper they are reading does have some issues that we're investigating, so that they can be informed if they choose to cite that paper in their own work or anything like that. A less serious version of an expression of concern is a journal notice. So this might denote an ongoing investigation. It's very similar to an expression of concern, but in the case of an expression of concern, we're more likely to use that where we think that either correction or retraction will be subsequently published, versus a journal notice can disappear from the record once the investigation has completed. So importantly to note, COPE does recommend an educational approach in the first instance of issues. So if the author does demonstrate a repeat pattern of misconduct, then the editor might contact their institution. But like I mentioned before, in the first instance, mistakes do happen. So retractions sound scary, of course, but we do follow COPE's guidance on when to issue retractions. And again, it's always to correct the literature and not to punish authors. So COPE's reasons for retractions are just here. So the findings have become unreliable because of a major error that couldn't be fixed with a correction. So for example, a large amount of data fabrication or a serious data analysis error that's happened by accident. The paper constitutes plagiarism. The paper has been previously published elsewhere. Contents or material or data without authorization. So for example, if you got data that was not intended for you and you published a paper on it, it would fall into this category. Copyright infringement as well. It is a legal issue, so it sounds not as serious as some of these other issues, but it still can get your paper retracted, so one to definitely consider. It reports unethical research, so either you didn't have appropriate IRB approval, or you strayed from what the IRB had approved for you in your research. It's been published solely on the basis of a manipulated or compromised peer review process, or the authors failed to disclose major competing interests. So that would be something like being paid by a company whose product you're using in your manuscript and not appropriately disclosing that. So that's everything for me. So thank you so much for your attention and interest in this important topic. So does anyone have any questions about research integrity or publication ethics? We do have a bit of time. I think you might have got a lot of AI questions out earlier.